We are on DAF Hey Amud Aleph on the third line. Because this is my first DAF in Maseches Zevachim, so just to review the whole topic of Zevachim in the first parak is if a person brings a korban shelo lishma, he brings the korban without the proper intent for the sake of that korban. If it's slaughtered for the sake of a different korban from what it's meant for, so with the exception of a korban chatas and a korban pesach, those are the two exceptions to the rule. The general rule is that the korban is still kosher, but it's not ola. A person does not fulfill his obligation with that korban because it wasn't brought with the proper kavana. So if a person was bringing it, let's say, as a particular kind of fulfillment of obligation, and it was slaughtered without that intention, it's still a kosher korban, but the bringer has to replace the animal. Okay, and the exception to that is korban pesach and korban chatas. If a korban chatas is brought without the proper intent, it's pasul. You can't do zrika sadam. And by korban pesach, that only is true if it's offered on the 14th, shelo l'shem, for the wrong intent, either not for a korban pesach or not for the bringer, for that particular bringer of the korban. So that's the general rule. And comes along Reish Lakish and he challenges the whole concept. Rami Reish Lakish al ma'ohe be medrasha umakshi. Reish Lakish was lying on his stomach in the Beis Medrash, and he asked the following question. Now, why in the world was he lying on his stomach? And the second question is, why is that fact relevant to the nature of the question? Like, why would the Gemara want to even portray him as doing something so bizarre? Right? So, let's see the question first, and then we'll talk about it. Im kisherim heim yirtzu ve'im ein miratzin lamaboin. He just says, I don't understand. If a korban is kosher, then why doesn't it fulfill the bringer's obligation? And if it doesn't fulfill the bringer's obligation, why is it kosher to be brought? He's asking basically mima nafshach. Now, there are some who just say that Reish Lakish's habit was to lie that way in the Beis Medrash. That doesn't seem appropriate. Saw a perush last night that suggests that Reish Lakish, when he would study the laws of korbanos, it would make a very profound effect on him because korbanos are generally brought to atone for sin. We know that Reish Lakish had a very sordid past. He was a ganaf in a previous life. And so he would remember all the times that he ate stolen goods. And so he would lie on his stomach when discussing the laws of korbanos to remember that it's this stomach that my belly was filled with so many stolen things and I have so much to be machaper for. And that would be his reminder by lying on his stomach. Okay? Anyway, Amar lo Rebbe Elazar, Matzino beboyin la'achar misa shehin kasherin ve'in meratzin. So Rebbe Elazar says, we do have a precedent that a korban can be brought, it's kosher, but it doesn't fulfill the bringer's obligation. Ditnan, ha'isha shehivia chatasa umesa, yaviu yarshin olasa. Olasa umesa lo yaviu yarshin chatasa. If a woman has just given birth to a child, the halacha is she brings one bird for a chatas and one bird for an ola. And the halacha is that if she was successful in bringing her chatas and then died, the heirs can still bring her korban ola, even though she's no longer alive, and so therefore it doesn't have the desired effect. So you see that you can bring a korban, it's kosher. The exception, of course, is the chatas. Once a chatas's owner has died, you don't bring that animal as a chatas. So Amar lei modino lach ba'ola da asya la'achar misa. Asham delo asi la'achar misa minolan. So Reish Lakish's response is, I can accept an ola, which is not being brought as an atonement. I can understand that can be brought post-mortem, right? Even though, there's no point of bringing it for that person. But a korban asham is coming to atone for a person's sin. If it's not brought properly, then why should it be brought at all? It shouldn't be brought la'achar misa, just like a chatas cannot be brought la'achar misa. And it should not be brought if it's not being offered, if it's not being slaughtered for the proper intent. So Amarle Hare Machlukas Chabitzido Rabbi Eliezer Omer Afa Asham. So Rabbi Elazar, the colleague of Reish Lakish, says, well, if you're bothered about an asham, so then you must side with Rabbi Eliezer of the Mishnah, because Rabbi Eliezer of the Mishnah also agrees with you, and he said that just like you can't bring a chatas, if it was a chatas was shechted shelo lishma, it cannot be brought. The same thing is true about an asham. Now, it's true that the Chachamim disagree with that, and they say that an asham shelo lishma is also kosher, but at least Rabbi Eliezer sides with your argument. So, Amar Zehu Sha'omrim Alav Adam Gadol Hava, Ka'amina Ana Mishnah Shalema Va'at Amart Li Rabbi Eliezer? Question mark. He says, are you the guy that they say is such a smart cookie, such a great scholar? I'm telling you an argument, and the Chachamim don't hold of this argument. So you're just telling me, well, Rabbi Eliezer agrees. Shkoyach, that doesn't help. What are the Chachamim going to say? So, Ella, Amar Reish Lakish, Eftach Ana Pischel Nafshoy. So let me at least create an opening for my soul. In other words, let me offer myself some kind of response. And it's based on the pasuk, Motzasif Asecha v'goymer, Haine Dava Nederhu v'chulei Kidele El. Basically, he used the same line of reasoning from the pasuk that we saw yesterday in the Gemara. The Gemara had raised the contradiction in the pasuk. The pasuk says, Motzasif Asecha Tishmor ve'asisa, Ka'asher nadarta l'Hashem Elokecha nidava asher dibarta beficha. The Torah says, whatever comes out of your mouth, if you make a pledge, you have to fulfill that pledge. But the Torah changes the language. Instead of calling it a neder, it calls it a nedava afterwards. So what does that mean, neder versus... A neder is a pledge. A nedava is a voluntary gift that is not coming because of a prior pledge obligation. So why does the Torah change the verbiage? It's telling me that even when I cannot bring the korban as a fulfillment of my pledge because it was not slaughtered properly, I still bring it as an acceptable korban, as an nedava. It's brought as a gift offering, not that it fulfills my obligation, but rather it's still a kosher korban. And basically, Reish Lakish says, listen, I don't get it, but at least the Torah gets it. And if the Torah says that it works, it works. So, Yosef Rabbi Zera Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba, V'Yosef Abaya Gabayhu, V'Yosef Uka So Reb Zera and Reb Yitzchak bar Abba are seated, and Abaya is seated above them as the Rebbe, and he hears them discussing this subject. Kashi leila Reish Lakish, Asham delo asi la'achar misa, v'nasav la Talmud amotzasif asecha. So basically, his problem was that Reish Lakish felt that a korban asham cannot be brought post-mortem, just like a korban chatas. You can't atone for someone's sin if that person is no longer alive. And so he was able to find solace and consolation by using the Gemara's argument from the pasuk. So Ema, haba b'neder u'v'nedava laisi v'lo lirtzi, but asham lo laisi klal. But why couldn't you respond to Reish Lakish's answer? In other words, Reish Lakish's answer is not satisfactory. Maybe the pasuk, when it says that even though something was originally a neder, it could be converted into a nedava, is when a person made a pledge to bring a korban, it wasn't slaughtered properly, and therefore it is just brought as a nedava instead. But that doesn't address a korban asham, which is not being brought because of a voluntary pledge, but is rather being brought as a guilt offering. Maybe that you can't bring at all if it's not slaughtered properly. So Amar Lahu Abaye, Reish Lakish mehacha pasach. So the Gemara says that Abaya answered them. In other words, really like we're bothered with, how did Reish Lakish find consolation in that pasuk? Maybe the pasuk is not talking about a korban asham. So Abaya said, Reish Lakish found consolation because of this. The pasuk says, "V'shachat osa lichatas, osa lishma kishera, shelo lishma pesula, hashar kadshim shelo lishman kisherim." But there's another pasuk, which is that the Torah, when it talks about the korban chatas, it says he shall slaughter it for a chatas. Now that implies that only when it's slaughtered for the sake of a chatas is it kosher. And if not, it's totally pasul and you cannot sprinkle its blood on the altar. It's totally pasul as a korban. But that implies only the chatas. The word osa is a miyut. only the chatas has that status that if it's not slaughtered properly, it's pasul. But all other karbanos, if they're not slaughtered properly, are not pasul, they're still kosher, but they just don't fulfill one's obligation. Yachol yiratzu, you might think that for all other karbanos, not only are they kosher, but they also fulfill one's obligation. Tamulomar, motzasif asecha. And that's where you come into the pasuk of motzasif asecha tishmor v'yasi. So the fact that the Torah changes from neder to nedava teaches me that it doesn't fulfill your initial pledge or initial obligation. Ve'ema haba b'neder nedava leisi v'lo lirtzi asham irtzu yenami lirtzi. But maybe I can make the opposite argument. The students persisted with Abaya. And they said, maybe the pasuk of motzasif asecha is telling me that only when it comes to pledge karbanos do we say that the korban, if because it was slaughtered incorrectly, can still be brought, but it doesn't fulfill your obligation. But a korban asham is different in what sense? It's different from the chatas because only the chatas is totally pasul. It's different from a korban neder because there you don't fulfill your obligation. But an asham may be different from both of them. Maybe an asham, if you slaughter it incorrectly, not only is it still kosher, but you can still fulfill your obligation with that asham. How do you know from that pasuk? Maybe that pasuk's only talking about a korban neder. So Amar Abaye, asham demirtzi, lo matzi amart kal v'chomer me'ola. Uma ola she'ena mechaperes, ena meratzeh, asham shemechaper, eno din she'eno meratzeh. So the Abaye's response is, look, logically that makes no sense. Make a kal v'chomer from the korban ola. If a guy pledges to bring a korban ola, and he brings the animal and it's slaughtered incorrectly, with, shalo lishma, right? It's slaughtered shalo lishma. That korban does not fulfill the bringer's obligation, even though a korban ola pledge offering is not to atone for sin. Surely then, something that is obligatory to atone for sin, if it's slaughtered shalo lishma, is not going to be kosher and fulfill the person's obligation. It'll still be kosher, but it's not going to fulfill the person's obligation. But the Gemara says, but wait a minute. Maybe that's a faulty kal v'chomer, because mala ola shekain kalil. Maybe an ola is more chomer, because when you bring an ola as a neder to fulfill a pledge, you have to completely burn the carcass to ash on the mizbeach. But a korban asham is partially eaten. But shlamim yochichu. Well, all right, I'll give you an example from korban shlamim. That's also part of the pasuk. What if a person takes a pledge to bring a korban shlamim? There, and it's shechted shalo lishma. There too, the pasuk says that it's kosher, but it's not ola l'shem chova. You don't fulfill your obligation. So make a kal v'chomer from there. But the Gemara says ma l'shlamim shekain te'unin nisachin utenufas chazei v'shok. But I can bring a pircha from the korban shlamim. Maybe korban shlamim is more chomer than a korban asham, because a shlamim requires all these additional accoutrements. You need to have libations. You need to wave the chest and the thigh of the animal in all 6 directions. When you bring a korban shlamim, those are not things that you have to do for a korban asham. So ola tochiach. Well, then I'll bring you a korban ola that doesn't require libations and tenufas chazei v'shok. V'chazer hadin lo re'izeh ki re'izeh, v'lo re'izeh ki re'izeh. Hatzad hashavah shebahen shem kodshim v'shachtan shelo lishman ksherin ve'ein meratzin. Afani avi asham shu kodesh v'shachtu shelo lishma kosher ve'eino meratzin. So I have a classic tzad hashavah. What is a tzad hashavah? A commonality between 2 examples. Each one of them has a facet of stringency, but when you put them together, you conclude that they collectively prove the rule. And the rule, therefore, is between the 2 of them, the ola and the shlamim together, is that they are sacrificial offerings. When shechted shalo lishma, they are still kosher, but they do not fulfill the bringer's obligation. They're not what's called meratzeh. That's the term meratzeh, right? So then the same thing shall apply to all karbanos except the chatas, including, so it'll apply to korban asham as well. It's kodshim, it's sacrificial. If it's shechted shalo lishma, it's kosher, but it's not meratzeh. So the Gemara now says, but wait a minute. But an ola and a shlamim are both karbanos that can be brought as a communal sacrifice. A korban ola is brought as the korban tamid is a korban ola. It's a completely burnt offering twice a day. And a korban shlamim, Rashi says, kivsei atzeres. The sheep that are brought on Shavuos are shlomim sacrifices. They're brought for the entire community. But there's no such thing as a communal korban asham. So maybe that's the reason why they're more chamer, that it's not meratzah, but maybe a korban asham that was shechted shelo lishma is meratzah. The Gemara answers, Toda yochiach. But let me bring you a korban toda. We'll make it a 3-way tzad hashav instead of a 2-way tzad hashav. So a korban toda is not brought by the community, and still it fits into the pasuk of motzasa fasecha. So therefore you see that just like over there it's kosher but it's not meratzah, so too by asham. So, but wait a minute, malatoda shekain to unolechem. But wait a minute, maybe a toda is special because you have to bring 40 special loaves of bread. Maybe that's its stringency, that it's not meratzah. But olo shlomim yochichu v'chazer adin lo reizeh ki reizeh v'lo reizeh ki reizeh hatzad hashavah shebahen shem kodshim v'shachtan shlo lishman kasher v'einu meratzeh afani avi asham shu kodesh v'shachtan shlo lishmo kasher v'einu meratzeh. So now you have a 3-way tzad hashavah. The Ola, the Shlomim, and the Toda collectively show you that their commonality is that they are Kodshim. If they're Shechted Shelo Lishman, they're still kosher, but they're not Meratzah. They don't fulfill the bringer's obligation. I'll tell you the same thing is true by a Korban Asham. But wait a minute. Mala Hatzara Shavah Shebahen Shehin Boyin Beneder Uvinedava. But one second. There's still a basic problem. All 3 Karbanos, the Shlomim, the Ola, and the Korban Toda, may be a special case. Why? Because they're Boyin Binedava. The Torah allows them to be brought, Shehin Boyin Bineder Uvinedava. They can be brought both as a neder and a nedava, as a voluntary offering. So maybe the Torah is more stringent when it allows you to bring these things as a voluntary offering than it is by a korban asham. Maybe a korban asham, because it's an obligatory korban, and the Torah wants it to fulfill your obligation, maybe there, even if it's shechted shelo lishma, it's not only kosher, but it's meratzah. But these things that are brought as voluntary offerings, the Torah says, listen, if you didn't do it right, just bring it again, because no one told you you had to bring it. So maybe that's the argument. So therefore you could say that they're not analogous to korban asham. So Ella Amar Rava Zos HaTorah v'goymer Hekisho HaKosav Lishlamim Mashlamim Shein Kodshim V'Shachtan Shelo Lishman Kesherim Vein Meratzin Afani Avi Asham Shu Kodesh V'chulei. So the Gemara says, but okay, you're right. I can't base it on logic using a tzad hashavah. I'll have to base it on the pasuk that we saw yesterday. The Torah says Zos HaTorah, that we say in the on Yontif, right? What's the Kakeli, the Ha'olah, right? In Kakeli we use this pasuk Zos HaTorah la'olah la'mincha v'la'chatas v'la'asham v'la'miluim u'l'zevach hashlamim. The Torah connects all of those karbanos together, including the asham. It connects every korban to a korban shlamim. That just like a korban shlamim, when it's shechted shelo lishma, is kosher but it's not meratzah, so too a korban asham. So the Gemara's next question is, my chaz is the akshas l'shlamim, akshas l'chatas. But you can also connect a korban asham to a korban chatas, because a chatas is also in that pasuk. So the Gemara answers, hami'et rachmana osa. Yes, but as we showed you on the previous page, the Torah has already pointed out that chatas is unique. V'shachat osa lechatas. Only the chatas has a special feature that if it's shechted shelo lishma, it's not kosher and it's not meratzah. But by all other karbanos, it's kosher but it's not meratzah. And therefore, since the Torah explicitly pulls out the chatas as the exception, that's the reason why we connect the asham to a shlamim and not to a chatas. Okay, next topic. Yosef.
Our owner brings a new one.
The owner has to bring a new one. That's exactly what Eino Meratzeh means. Exactly. Say Yosef Rav Huna v'Rav Nachman v'Yosef Rav Sheshes Gabayu v'Yasif Yukamri. So let's go back to Reish Lakish. Remember, Reish Lakish was so disturbed initially. How can it be that a korban is kosher but it's not meratzah? It's either got to be kosher and meratzah, or it shouldn't be kosher at all, right? So that was Reish Lakish's whole premise, right? And then he finally said, listen, I don't get it, but the pasuk says that it happens, right? So Yosef Rav Huna v'Rav Nachman v'Yosef Rav Sheshes Gabayu v'Yosef v'Kamri. So these two rabbis are sitting in front of Rav Sheshis, who's over them.
It's so interesting. It's talking about their physical positioning.
All throughout this sugya, it talks about their physical positioning. Yeah.
In your stomach or your.
Yeah, exactly. So kash shalei l'reish lakish asham delo asi la'achar misa leimalei Rabbi Lazar asham nami asi la'achar misa. So here is the problem. Let's go back to that conversation that Reish Lakish had with Rabbi Lazar. So, because what was Rabbi Lazar's response to Reish Lakish's argument? I'll show you an example of a korban that even after the owner has died can still be brought, even when therefore it's not fulfilling one's obligation because the person is already deceased, and yet we still see that the korban can be brought. That was the example they gave by a yoledis, a woman who gave birth and then died shortly thereafter, right? So what was Reish Lakish's response to Rebbe Lazar? That's all well and good by other karbanos, like a korban ola, but a korban asham cannot be brought post-mortem. So maybe it also can't be brought if it's shechted shelo lishma. But that's problematic, Reish Lakish, right? Why? Because you're working under the premise that an asham cannot be brought la'achar misa. Who told you that? Asham nami yasi la'achar misa. And asham can be brought la'achar misa, right? So in other words, and how do we know this? We know this from other discussions, and like Rashi brings us the background information. It doesn't mean that you can bring that exact animal. If a korban asham's owner dies, what do you do with the animal? You send the animal out to pasture, you allow it to graze until it develops a mum, and then you exchange the value of that animal onto coinage, and that money is then used to purchase olos. It's called the kitz or the kayetz hamizbeach. It's basically the whenever there's downtime on the altar, you bring with this money you bring just sacrificial animals. So you see that this animal, even post-mortem, is in some way converted to go to the mizbeach. So you see that an asham can be brought post-mortem. So what was Reish Lakish's problem in the first place? So Amr Lahu Rav Sheshes, asham l'mai karev l'mosaro, chatas nami mikrav kreva mosara. So Rav Sheshes is listening to this discussion and he says to them, well, if that's your interpretation about an asham being usable la'achar misa, then even a chatas is usable after misa. And what's the example? If a person had set aside two korban chatases, one is an insurance policy, and he fulfills his obligation with one of them. So what does he do with the other one? So that animal has to graze until it develops a mum. And
it's one of the 5 conditions.
Yeah, it's one of the 5 conditions. But the point is that a chatas can also be brought la'achar misa, or if the owner died, right? Then the halacha is the animal has to graze. And you also you let it develop a mum, and you use the proceeds to bring a korban nedava. So the Gemara says, Chatas afal gav dekreva mosara mi'et rachmana hu. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute. But that's the argument that I'm trying to make. Yes, it's true that a chatas can eventually, shemesu be'aleha can eventually be converted. The Torah still says that a korban chatas is unique. Like Rashi says, B'sa'ir nasi ksiv b'shchitaso v'shachad oso b'mkom asher yishchad asol l'fnei Hashem chatas hu. That you can only shecht a chatas for the sake of a chatas. And if you don't shecht it for the sake of a chatas, then it's totally puzzle. And so therefore, we know explicitly from the pasuk that a chatas that is shechted shelo lishma is totally puzzle. But in asham, we don't have that pasuk. So therefore, in other words, using the logical argument that if you see that something can be brought la'achar misa, it can also be kosher if it's done shelo lishma, that applies to an asham, but it doesn't apply to a chatas because the Torah says chatas hu. The Torah says that a chatas is unique. But wait a minute, asham nami ksiv bei hu. But there's an extra word hu by a korban asham. And where does it say that? So it says that by the hiktir osam hakohen hamizbecha ishel Hashem asham hu, right? The korban asham also has the extra word hu, And that should imply that if it's shechted shelo lishma, it's not going to be kosher. The Gemara says no. Hahu la'achar haktores emurim hu dichsiv. No, that pasuk in its proper context, if you go back to where that pasuk, the word hu is written by the Korban Asham, it's written after the innards of the animal have been placed on the altar. So that can't be telling me that I have to place the innards on the altar lishma, and if not, the korban is pasul, because technically, even if you never place the innards of the animal on top of the mizbeach, as long as you do zrikas adam, the korban is kosher. So the word hu, when it's in its context in the asham, cannot be coming to teach me anything about shchita shelo lishma, because it's not referring to that stage of the animal's bringing. It's talking about a stage where even if that stage is not performed at all, the animal is still kosher. So the word hu cannot be coming to limit the animal's eligibility and kashrus. Kidatanya, aval asham lo nemar bohu ela la'achar haktaris emurim, v'hu atzmo im lo hiktiram emurim kosher. As the Gemara speaks out, what I just said, the word hu cannot be telling me that if that stage of its bringing is not done lishma, then it's pasul, because even if it's not done at all, the animal is kosher. So ve'elahu lamali. So then taka, why then do you have the extra word hu by the Korban Asham? If it's not coming to exclude its kashrus, what is it coming for? So l'chid Rav Huna Amarav, the Amar Rav Huna Amarav, Asham shenitek l'ri'iyah v'shachto stam kosher. Nitek in, lo nitek lo. So the answer is like this. If a person has a Korban Asham, this is what the word hu is coming to teach. A person set aside a Korban Asham, and then the animal, let's say, got lost. So he took aside another Korban Asham, and he brought that as his kapara. Okay? Then all of a sudden he finds animal A. He finds the original animal. What are you supposed to do with that animal? You're supposed to, like we said before, you let it go out and graze, let it develop a mum, take its proceeds, and bring another animal for a Korbanola, for an adava. However, what happens if you send out the animal to graze, and some Yankel comes along not realizing what had happened and says, oh, I know that this is Yankel's Korban Asham. Let me do him a favor and I'll bring it as his Korban Asham. So if you shechted it stam, if you thought just stam that it's a korban without having anything, any other kavana in mind, so without saying specifically that it's an asham, so then the animal is kosher. Even though lechatchila you're not allowed to do this, the animal has to graze and develop a mum. But if someone comes along thinking that this animal is a korban and just shechts it and says, I hereby bring it for whatever it's meant for, without saying explicitly that it's an asham, the animal is kosher. But nitek in, lo nitek lo. But if a person were to take an animal that has been designated as an asham, and the owner did not replace it, and this is his sole Korban Asham, and a Kohen just takes the animal and shechts it without thinking about what kind of animal it is, what kind of korban it is, then it's not kosher. That's what you infer from this halacha. That if a regular Korban Asham, not an Asham that was lost and then found again, but a regular Korban Asham, if the guy shechted it without it being l'shem Asham, so then the animal is not kosher. My taima amar krahu b'hav yaso yeh. And the answer is, because the Torah says specifically by an asham that it must be done lishma, and if it's done stam, then it's not going to be kosher. See, by other karbanos, if it's done stam, then you could make an argument that the korban is still kosher. But by over here, but over here it's but over here, if it's done stam, the korban asham is not going to be kosher. Okay, let us go weiter. Yosef Rav Nachman v'Rav Sheshes v'Yosef Rav Ada bar Masna Gabayo v'Yosef Ka'amri. So continuing this analysis of Reish Lakish, Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes are sitting in front of Rav Ada bar Masna, and they're also having this conversation. Hadekama Rabbi Elazar matzinu beboin la'achar miser she'in kasherin ve'in meratzin. Rabbi Elazar's whole argument to Reish Lakish was, look, what's your problem, Reish Lakish? We find that if a person dies before they brought their korban, you still bring their korban, even though it's not atoning for anything, it's not fulfilling their obligation because they're already deceased, and yet the animal is still kosher. So what could have Reish Lakish responded? Lema le Reish Lakish hanahu nami laisu v'lirtzu. Why couldn't Reish Lakish respond to Rebbe Lazar rather, and say, but wait a minute, maybe even post-mortem, not only is it kosher, but it also fulfills the obligation. So what kind of statement is that? How can you fulfill a dead person's obligation? Once he's dead, he has no more obligation. So Amar lehen Rav Ada Bar Masna, Yoledis im hiyolda boneha miyoldu. In other words, the assumption is the heirs of a woman, they take this animal, maybe they can use it not for the dead person's obligation, but maybe it atones for them in some way. In other words, in the event that I can benefit from the sacrificial benefits of an animal, maybe it helps benefit me, the heir. So the response, said Rav Ada Bar Ahava to them, is, what are you talking about? She had to bring that korban because she had just given birth. Her son didn't just give birth. How could it atone for him? Atone for what? It was only meant to atone for childbirth. How does it fulfill one's obligation if they've never gone through childbirth? What kind of suggestion are you making? So maskif la Ravasi, uman leimalon di iika kama ase gaba lo miskapra, v'keven di iika kama ase gaba michapra, yorshanami michapri. So Ravasi says, I'm sorry, but that doesn't make sense, what you just said. Because the truth is that if a woman just gave birth to a child, and she has an obligation to bring a korban ola as a result, but the korban ola helps for other things. If a person has sinful thoughts and they bring a korban ola, it helps atone for sinful thoughts. There are plenty of things that a korban ola can atone for mitzvahs aseh that I violate, right? I may not be obligated to bring the korban, but if I want to feel that sense of purging after violating a mitzvahs aseh, I can bring a korban ola. So just like when she brings a korban ola to atone for childbirth or to fulfill her obligation after childbirth, that korban can also cover her other things that she wishes to atone for. Why can't her heir, after the mother has died and this animal is left over, why can't he say, well, just like my mother could have used it, not only for childbirth, but for other things as well that she wanted to purge herself of, I'll use it for that same thing, even though I didn't have a child, but I'll still purge myself of other sins that I've done. Lememr dekanyalahu. So 1 second, the Gemara says, but the whole premise of your question is based on the assumption that the heir actually becomes the owner of the animal. Is that what you're suggesting? And therefore, since he's the owner of the animal, let him bring the animal as a korban and let it work to atone for his sins. But wait a minute. V'ha'amar Rabbi Yochanan hiniach mincha l'shnei banav umeis kareva ve'ein bo shutfus. But 1 second, Rabbi Yochanan had taught us, when it comes to a flour offering, if a person had set aside flour to bring as a korban mincha, and then he died, his children shall bring the korban mincha, and there's no problem of partnership. Now, what does that mean? It means that, as we'll learn in Maseches Menachos, we'll learn it here in Zevachim as well, that when a person, when you set aside flour for a korban mincha, it cannot be brought by more than one person. It has to be brought by an individual. Two people cannot be partners in a korban mincha. Now, if a guy leaves over 2 children, and they now become the owner of this whole person's estate, they're partners in the estate. So if you're suggesting that they acquire a person's animal, like when the mother dies after childbirth, then the same thing should be true with a man who dies and leaves over flour for a korban mincha. Why is that korban mincha kosher if a korban mincha cannot be brought by 2 partners? So v'isal kadaitach kanyaluhu nefesh amarachmana v'lo kanyaluhu the nefesh amarachmana exclamation point. The Torah says that only one person can bring a korban mincha, and not partners. So it must be that they don't acquire it, that they're just bringing it for their deceased father without them actually owning the flour. And if they're not the owners, then your initial premise, which was they can use it to atone for their own sins, is not going to work. How can I use someone else's korban to atone for my sins? So v'lo kanyaluhu. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, you're telling me that the heir does not acquire the korban that their deceased parent left? V'ha'amar Rabbi Yochanan hiniach behema l'shnei banav umeis kareva ve'ein memirin ba. But Rabbi Yochanan had made a different statement, that if a person dies and left over a sacrificial animal to his 2 sons, then the halacha is the animal should be brought as a korban, and it's not a problem because this is an animal sacrifice. However, his heirs cannot make it tamura. What does tamura mean? Anyone know what the word tamura means? An exchange. What does that mean? What does it mean to make an exchange? I have animal A that has been designated as a korban, and I take animal B and I say, B shall be like A. That's what an act of tamura means. Now, only the owner of an animal can declare something to be tamura. If I'm not the owner of the animal, I can't declare it to be tamura. So the Gemara seems to be suggesting, Rabbi Yochanan seems to suggest, that the heirs are not able to make it tamura. So in other words, the Iyomart Bishlam Akanyalahu Haino Dein Memirinabo Dahavilahu Kishutfin. I'm sorry. It sounds like they are the owners of the animal because there's a halacha by tamura. I can take my animal and make it tamura with someone else's animal. So that's not the issue over here. The issue over here is they seem to be the owners. The reason why you cannot make an animal tamura is because you can't make tamura when an animal is owned by two parties. If animal A is jointly owned, then it cannot make another animal tamura. So that would make sense if they become the joint owners of animal A. That's why they can't make animal B tamura from animal A, because there's a special gzeras hakasav by tamura that tells me that it's based on lefisha kol parsha kula nemar b'lashon yachid, as Rashi says. The whole parsha of tamura is written in the singular, implying that only when the animal is owned by a singular person can it make other animals tamura. But if the original animal is owned by partners, it cannot make another animal tamura. And therefore the problem is, it seems from here that the two sons who inherit their father's animal are the partners in the animal, and that's why they can't make animal B tamura. V'shutfin lo matzu meimirin. Ela iyomart lo kanyilhu emuri nami limru. But if you're going to tell me that they don't acquire the animal, then why can't they make animal B tamura? So it's a kasha. Are they the owners or are they not the owners? So the Gemara says, Shaini hasam do'amar kra im hamer yamir l'rabos es hayoresh. Echad meimir ve'ein shnayim meimirin. So the Gemara's conclusion is that in reality, heirs do not acquire their parents' sacrificial animal. And that's why Reish Lakish did not come back to Rebbe Lazar and say that let the children bring their mother's childbirth sacrifice to atone for their sins, because it's not their animal. Why then is there a halacha that the heirs cannot make the animal tamura? It's owned by a single entity who is deceased. So the answer is because there's a specific clause in the pasuk of tamura that says im hamer yamir. Hamer Yamir tells me that an heir has the ability to make an animal tamura from his father's holy animal that he left for them, but only if the heir is also a singularity. Only one heir can declare his father's animal tamura to turn on to another animal. But if there's more than one heir, joint heirs cannot declare their father's animal to be a tamura animal. Rabbi says Hayoresh, it's coming to include a Yoresh, that a Yoresh, even though he doesn't own the animal, can declare the animal to be a tamura animal and pass its kedusha onto animal B. However, only one heir can do it and not two heirs. So that's the conclusion of the Gemara, that the heirs do not acquire the animal. And we're still in the middle of the sugya, but at least this is a good stop point, because we've come to that conclusion to defend the conversation between Reish Lakish and Rebbe Lazar.
Who gets it? The Beis Hamikdash gets all these korbanos, these animals. Who owns it?
Any animal that's brought as a korban is property of the Beis
The
Hamikdash.
parents, your Yerusha, that they can't acquire because it's a kodesh.
If it's being brought as a korban, it de facto is the property of the Beis Hamikdash.
Why do they have to?
It's being brought as a korban. The father dies, the animal's being brought as a korban.
But they can't.
They don't have control over the animal. They can't bring the animal for their own sins. They can't declare the animal to be tamura.
How do they own it? So how do they own it?
They don't own. The conclusion of the Gemara is they do not own the animal. They do not own the animal. It belongs to it's still the animal of the decedents who has an obligation to give over that animal to the Beis HaMikdash. And so they give it over to the Beis HaMikdash on behalf of the deceased father, but it's not their property. It's still their dead father's property.